Eleanor Thompson sat alone at her kitchen table, staring at the small cupcake with a single candle she'd bought herself. The tiny flame flickered, casting dancing shadows across her weathered hands. 80 years old today, and not a single call, text, or card from her 3 children. The realization stung more than she cared to admit. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. She glanced at her phone once more, no notifications. Then her eyes drifted to the small wooden box tucked in the corner of her china cabinet. Inside lay 40 years of birthday and Christmas checks she'd never cashed, saved for a rainy day. Well, if being forgotten by your children on your 80th birthday wasn't a downpour, she didn't know what was. Eleanor blew out the candle, made a decision, and smiled for the first time that day. Europe had always been calling her name. Perhaps it was finally time to answer. The morning of my 80th birthday began like any other day. The October sun filtered through my kitchen curtains as I prepared my usual cup of Earl Grey tea. My joints ache a bit more than usual. Perhaps the weather was changing, or perhaps it was just another reminder that I had officially become an octogenarian. I lived alone in the modest 2-bedroom house in Riverside, Connecticut that Roger and I had purchased nearly 50 years ago. After Roger passed away 12 years earlier, my 3 children, James, Patricia, and Michael, had suggested I sell the house and move into a retirement community. I refused. This house held too many memories, and besides, I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself. As I sipped my tea, I couldn't help but feel a flutter of anticipation. Surely one of my children would call soon. James lived just 30 minutes away in Hartford with his wife Susan and their 2 teenagers. Patricia was in Boston, busy with her law practice but never too busy for her mother. Or so I thought. Michael, my youngest, had moved to Phoenix 5 years ago with his second wife, but he usually sent a card or called on important occasions. By noon, my phone remained silent. I checked it several times to ensure it was working properly. It was. The truth slowly sank in. They had forgotten. I tried to rationalize it. James was preparing for a big presentation at work. Patricia was in the middle of a high-profile case. Michael was dealing with stepchildren and a new baby. They were busy with their own lives. It was understandable. But as the hours ticked by, rationalization gave way to hurt, and hurt transformed into something else entirely. Resolve. I walked over to my china cabinet and removed the small wooden box from the top shelf. Roger had carved it for me when we were first married. Inside were dozens of checks, birthday and Christmas gifts from distant relatives, friends, and even my children over the years. I'd never cashed them. Roger and I had always lived frugally, and we'd taught our children the importance of saving for emergencies. One day you'll need it, I would tell them. Best to be prepared for a rainy day. I'd been waiting for that rainy day for decades. Now, as I sat alone on my 80th birthday, I realized it had finally arrived, just not in the way I'd expected. I counted the checks. Many expired, of course, but the more recent ones could still be cashed. Together with my savings account, I had nearly $24,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for what I had in mind. I'd never left the United States. Roger had always promised we'd go to Europe after he retired. We'd planned to see the Eiffel Tower, stroll through the streets of Rome, and visit the small village in Ireland where my grandmother was born. But Roger's heart attack at 65 had ended. Those dreams before they could begin, or so I thought. With trembling fingers, I reached for my laptop. My grandchildren had insisted on teaching me how to use it a few years ago, laughing at how slowly I typed. Now, I was grateful for their patience. I opened a browser and typed, "Best European destinations for solo senior travelers." The search results were overwhelming, but exhilarating. Paris, Rome, London, Barcelona, Vienna. So many places I'd only seen in movies or read about in books. Places that had existed only in my imagination for 8 decades. I spent the rest of my birthday researching flights, accommodations, and guided tours. By evening, I had a rough itinerary for a 6-week European adventure, beginning in London and ending in Rome. I could hardly believe what I was contemplating. It seemed reckless, impulsive, completely unlike me. Yet something about the idea felt right. I had spent my entire life being sensible, putting others first, and saving for tomorrow. But at 80, how many tomorrows did I have left? The next morning, I woke up feeling more alive than I had in years. My first call was to my doctor, Dr. Martinez. I needed to ensure I was physically capable of such a journey and get prescriptions for enough medication to last the trip. A European tour? At your age, Eleanor? Dr. Martinez seemed surprised during my appointment 2 days later. Yes, at my age, I replied firmly. I'm 80, not dead. Dr. Martinez chuckled and admitted that my health was excellent for a woman my age. With proper precautions and rest periods between travel, she saw no reason why I couldn't make the trip. She wrote out my prescriptions with enough refills to last 2 months and advised me on how to handle time zone changes with my medications. My next stop was the bank. Mr. Peterson, the manager who had known me for 30 years, raised his eyebrows when I told him I needed to cash all my valid checks and withdraw $15,000 from my savings account. That's a substantial sum, Mrs. Thompson. May I ask what it's for? A lifelong dream, Mr. Peterson. One I've put off for too long. He nodded slowly. I'll help you get this processed. Would you like some of it in traveler's checks or a prepaid travel card? It's safer than carrying cash. I opted for a combination of cash and a prepaid card, grateful for his advice. I'd never been much for modern banking. Roger had always handled our finances until he passed. The thought of him gave me a momentary pang of guilt. Would he approve of what I was doing? But then I remembered how his eyes would light up when he talked about showing me Venice, and I knew he would understand. That evening, my phone finally rang. It was Patricia. Mom, I'm so sorry about missing your birthday. This case has been absolute chaos and the days just blurred together. I could hear the genuine remorse in her voice, and for a moment, my resolve wavered. But then I thought of the flight to London I had just booked for the following week. It's all right, dear, I said, my voice calm. These things happen. Let me make it up to you. How about I come down this weekend and we'll have a proper celebration? That would be lovely, I replied, but I've already made plans with the ladies. From my book club. The lie came surprisingly easily. Patricia seemed relieved. That's great, Mom. I'm glad you're not spending it alone. I promise I'll visit soon, once this case is over. After Patricia's call, James and Michael both reached out with similar apologies. James blamed his forgetfulness on his presentation, and Michael on the baby's ear infection. I accepted their excuses graciously, not mentioning my plans. It wasn't out of spite. I simply knew they would try to talk me out of it. They'd cite concerns about my age, my health, and the dangers of traveling alone. They'd offer to take me themselves, someday, that ever-receding horizon of unfulfilled promises. No, this was something I needed to do for myself. The next few days were a flurry of activity. I researched the best walking shoes for cobblestone streets, ordered a lightweight suitcase with wheels that turned in all directions, and purchased a travel pillow, adapters for European outlets, and a money belt that went under my clothes. I also bought a new camera, a small digital one that would fit in my purse. I wanted to document everything, not just for memories, but perhaps as a gentle rebuke when I eventually told my children about my adventure. 3 days before my departure, Gladys Fisher from next door came over for coffee. We'd been neighbors for 30 years, and if there was anyone I trusted with my secret, it was her. "You're doing what?" she exclaimed when I told her, nearly spilling her coffee. "Going to Europe," For 6 weeks, I repeated, unable to hide my excitement. Eleanor, Thompson, you sly fox. I never would have expected this from you of all people. That's exactly why I need to do it, Gladys. I'm tired of being predictable, dependable Eleanor. I want to be daring for once in my life. Gladys reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Well, I think it's marvelous. Absolutely marvelous. Roger would be proud. Her words warmed me. I need a favor, though. Would you collect my mail and keep an eye on the house? I've told the children I'm going to visit my cousin Martha in Florida. Martha? Didn't she pass away 3 years ago? Yes. But they wouldn't know that. They barely remember their own mother's birthday. Gladys laughed. You've got more spirit than people half your age, Eleanor. Of course I'll help. But promise me one thing. Bring me back something scandalous from Paris. I promised, and we spent the rest of the afternoon going over my itinerary. Gladys, who had traveled extensively with her late husband, offered valuable advice about which attractions were worth the long lines and which were tourist traps. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The night before my departure, I packed my suitcase carefully. 2 pairs of comfortable walking shoes, 7 sets of clothes that could be mixed and matched, a light raincoat, medications organized in a pill case, photocopies of my passport and insurance information, and a small album of family photos. I wasn't completely heartless. I would miss my children and grandchildren during my adventure. I also packed Roger's old pocket watch. He'd carried it every day of our married life. For luck, he'd always said. I figured I could use a little of his luck where I was going. As I zipped up my suitcase, I felt a curious lightness. For decades, my identity had been defined by my relationships to others. Roger's wife, James, Patricia, and Michael's mother, and more recently, grandmother to 5 wonderful, if occasionally distant, grandchildren. But for the next 6 weeks, I would simply be Eleanor Thompson, traveler, adventurer, a woman fulfilling a lifelong dream. My flight to London was scheduled for 7:30 p.m. the following day. I'd arranged for a car service to take me to the airport, a luxury I'd never indulged in before, but the thought of navigating airport parking at my age was too daunting. That morning, I made one last call to each of my children, maintaining the Florida story. They were all relieved to hear I was spending time with Cousin Martha rather than alone in Connecticut as winter approached. That's a great idea, Mom, James said. The warm weather will be good for your arthritis. Take lots of pictures, Patricia encouraged. And don't let Martha talk you into anything crazy like parasailing. If only she knew. Michael's call was the hardest. I wish we lived closer, Mom. Tommy's been asking about his grandma. Maybe we can fly out to see you in the spring. That would be wonderful, dear, I replied, feeling a twinge of guilt. Give Tommy a big hug from Grandma. After the calls, I walked through each room of my house, making sure everything was in order. I turned the thermostat down, unplugged appliances, and left Gladys a spare key with detailed instructions for watering my plants. I also left her 3 envelopes, one for each of my children, to be mailed only if something happened to me during my travels. Inside each was a letter explaining where I'd really gone and why, along with my forgiveness for the forgotten birthday that had catalyzed this grand adventure. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across my living room, I sat in Roger's old armchair, his pocket watch in my palm. The familiar weight of it was comforting. Well, Roger, I whispered, I'm finally going to see those places we talked about. I wish you were coming with me, but I'll carry you in my heart. The doorbell rang. My car service had arrived. The driver, a young man named Keith, was surprised to find an 80-year-old woman traveling to Europe alone. My grandmother won't even go to the grocery store by herself, he remarked as he loaded my suitcase into the trunk. Then perhaps your grandmother needs to reconsider her limitations, I replied with a smile. As we pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back at the house. Instead, I looked ahead, toward the horizon, toward London, Paris, and all the places I'd dreamed of for so long. My heart raced with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. For the first time in decades, I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, and it was absolutely thrilling. The flight to London was unlike anything I had experienced. I'd flown domestically a handful of times to visit Patricia in Boston or attend family weddings, but never across an ocean. The vastness of the Atlantic beneath us made me feel both insignificant and liberated. I had splurged on a premium economy seat, another first. At my age, the extra legroom wasn't a luxury but a necessity. The young woman seated next to me, Amber, was traveling to London for a job interview. "First time in Europe?" she asked, noticing how I marveled at everything from the amenity kit to the touchscreen entertainment system. "First time anywhere that requires a passport," I admitted. Amber's eyes widened. "Really? That's amazing. What made you decide to go now?" I hesitated, then decided on honesty. My children forgot my 80th birthday. Instead of feeling sorry for myself, I decided to finally live out some dreams. Amber's face softened. "That's the most badass thing I've ever heard." I laughed, surprised at how good it felt to be described as badass at my age. Throughout the flight, Amber shared travel tips she'd picked up during her backpacking days. She showed me how to use the flight tracking map, recommended apps for navigating foreign cities, and insisted on helping me fill out my customs declaration form. "My grandma would never do what you're doing," she said as we began our descent into Heathrow. "She barely leaves her living room. You're inspiring for..." The second time in 2 days, someone had compared me favorably to their grandmother. It was a strange new feeling, being admired rather than pitied or merely tolerated because of my age. The customs officer at Heathrow raised an eyebrow when I handed him my passport. "First stamp?" he asked, noticing the pristine pages. "First. Of many, I hope," I replied. "Welcome to the United Kingdom, Mrs. Thompson. Enjoy your stay." Those words, so routine for him, so extraordinary for me, nearly brought tears to my eyes. I was here. I had actually done it. The pre-arranged car service I'd booked was waiting, holding a sign with Thompson clearly printed. The driver, a middle-aged man with a Cockney accent I could barely understand, helped me with my luggage and navigated the bustling London traffic with ease. "First time in London, Mum?" he asked, catching my wide-eyed expression in the rearview mirror. "Is it that obvious?" I laughed. "Got that look about you? Like a kid at Christmas, if you don't mind me saying." I didn't mind at all. That was exactly how I felt. My accommodation was a small boutique hotel in Kensington, chosen for its proximity to major attractions and its reputation for being senior-friendly. The lobby was warm and inviting, with plush armchairs and a crackling fireplace. That seemed to welcome me instantly. "Mrs. Thompson, we've been expecting you," the receptionist greeted me. "We've put you in a room on the ground floor as requested. No stairs to worry about." The room was modest but charming, with floral wallpaper and a window overlooking a small garden. After the long flight, all I wanted was a hot shower and a comfortable bed, both of which the hotel provided admirably. As I unpacked my few belongings, the reality of what I had done began to sink in. Eleanor Thompson was in London, alone, at 80 years old. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I took out Roger's pocket watch and placed it on the nightstand. "We made it to London, my love," I whispered. Despite my exhaustion, sleep didn't come easily that first night. The time difference, the unfamiliar sounds of the city, and the sheer excitement of being in a foreign country kept me tossing and turning. Around 3 a.m., I gave up, made a cup of tea using the in-room kettle, and sat by the window watching the occasional car or late-night pedestrian pass by. In the quiet darkness of that London hotel room, I felt a freedom I hadn't experienced since before I was married. No one knew where I was. No one expected anything from me. For the first time in decades, my time was entirely my own. Morning arrived with a soft rain tapping against my window. I dressed carefully in layers, remembering Gladys's advice about London's changeable weather, and ventured down to the hotel's breakfast room. The spread was impressive. Everything from traditional English breakfast items like beans and grilled tomatoes to continental offerings of croissants and fruit. I chose a little of everything, earning an approving nod from the server. "Building your strength for sightseeing, are you?" she asked cheerfully. "I have a lot to see and not much time to waste," I replied, surprising myself with my newfound boldness. My first full day in London was a gentle introduction to my European adventure. I had booked a guided London highlights tour specifically designed for seniors. Comfortable transportation, frequent rest stops, and a guide who didn't rush. Our small group gathered in the hotel lobby. There were 8 of us, a retired couple from Canada, a widow from Australia, 2 sisters from South Africa, and a couple from Seattle. I was the only solo traveler, which initially made me self-conscious until the Australian widow, Brenda, approached me. "Traveling alone too, are you? Good for you. My Harold's been gone for 5 years, and I'm tired of waiting for someone to see the world with." Brenda became my unofficial buddy for the day. We sat together on the minibus, shared observations, and watched out for each other in crowded areas. By lunchtime, we were exchanging email addresses and promising to send photos. The tour took us to Buckingham Palace, where we were lucky enough to catch the changing of the guard ceremony. The pageantry and precision of the guards in their tall bearskin hats was even more impressive in person than on television. We also visited Westminster Abbey, the Tower of London, and St. Paul's Cathedral. At each stop, I took photos with my new camera and sent silent messages to Roger. "The crown jewels are even more magnificent than you described, darling," I thought as we toured the tower. "The architecture of St. Paul's would have taken your breath away." By late afternoon, my feet were aching, but my heart was full. We ended the tour at Covent Garden, where our guide suggested we could either return to our hotels or explore the shops and restaurants on our own. "Anyone fancy a proper English tea?" Brenda suggested. "My treat. It's my birthday." "Mine too," I said without thinking. "Well, it was. Last week. My 80th. "No," Brenda exclaimed. "You don't look a day over 70. We absolutely must celebrate both our birthdays." And so, instead of returning to my hotel to rest as I had planned, I found myself in an elegant tea room, clinking china cups with my new Australian friend and the 2 South African sisters who had decided to join us. We shared stories of our lives, our late husbands, our children, and our grandchildren. When I mentioned that my children had forgotten my birthday, leading to this impromptu European tour, my companions were simultaneously outraged on my behalf and delighted by my response. "You're my hero," said one of the South African sisters, Margaret. "I'm going home and booking that Mediterranean cruise my daughter keeps telling me is too expensive." Returning to my hotel that evening, exhausted but happy, I found myself mentally composing postcards to my children. "Dear James, Patricia, and Michael," I would write. "Greetings from London, not Florida. Surprise! Your forgetfulness has given me the most extraordinary gift, courage, but I didn't send those postcards. Not yet." Part of me wanted to complete my journey before revealing my deception, to present them with a fait accompli they couldn't argue against or try to stop. The next morning, I woke to a text message from Gladys. "House still standing. No calls from the kids. How's Florida?" I smiled and sent her a photo of me in front of the iconic red telephone booths we had passed yesterday. "Warmer than expected. Miss you." My second day in London was dedicated to the British Museum. I had been an art history teacher before retiring, and the museum had been at the top of my bucket list for decades. I spent hours wandering through the galleries, marveling at the Rosetta Stone, the Elgin marbles, and countless other treasures. In the Egyptian wing, I found myself standing before a mummy case, contemplating mortality. This person had lived thousands of years ago, in a world unimaginably different from mine. Yet here we both were. They in their eternal rest, me in my twilight years, connected across millennia in this hushed gallery. An epiphany struck me then. Life was unbearably short, whether you lived to 30 or 80. What mattered wasn't the length, but the fullness. I had spent too many years planning for a future that never quite arrived, saving for rainy days while missing countless sunny ones. No more. If these 6 weeks were to be my last great adventure, I would embrace every moment. Left the museum reinvigorated and decided on a whim to take a boat tour of the Thames. The guide's commentary was informative, but I was more captivated by the city itself, the blend of ancient and modern, the way the golden late afternoon light played on the water and the historic buildings lining the shore. That evening, I did something I had never done before, dined alone in a restaurant. Not a fast food establishment or a casual cafe, but a proper restaurant with tablecloths and multiple courses. I chose a small Italian place near my hotel, where the waiter treated me not with pity, as I had feared, but with genuine warmth. "What brings you to London, signora?" he asked as he poured my wine. "Adventure," I replied simply. He nodded approvingly. The best reason of all. I savored every bite of my risotto, every sip of wine, and even treated myself to tiramisu for dessert. Roger would have loved this place, I thought. But for once, the thought brought a smile rather than sadness. On my final day in London, I visited Kew Gardens. Roger had been an amateur botanist, and I wanted to see the famous glass houses and exotic plants in his honor. The gardens were less crowded than the city attractions, allowing me to stroll at my own pace, breathing in the fragrant air and listening to the birds. In the Palm House, surrounded by tropical plants from around the world, I took out Roger's pocket watch and held it in my palm. "I wish you could see this," I whispered. "But I'm seeing it for both of us." A young gardener noticed me talking to the watch and smiled. "Is that a family heirloom?" "My husband's," I explained. "He always wanted to visit here." "Then he's here now, isn't he?" the gardener said gently. "Through you." Those simple words transformed my experience. For the rest of the day, I didn't feel alone at all. I was sharing this journey with Roger, carrying his dreams forward with my own. That evening, as I packed for the next leg of my journey, the Eurostar to Paris, my phone rang. It was Patricia. "Mom, how's Florida? Is Cousin Martha driving you crazy yet?" The lie I had told now felt uncomfortable, but I maintained it. "Florida is lovely, dear. How's the big case going?" Finally wrapped up. We won, by the way. Listen, I was thinking I might fly down next weekend to see you. Surprise Martha, too. What do you think? My heart raced. This was exactly what I had feared. My children inserting themselves into my fabricated plans. "Oh, that's so sweet of you, but..." "It's not a good time. Martha has a lot of medical appointments and I'm helping her. Maybe when I get back?" Patricia sounded disappointed but accepted my excuse. After we hung up, I felt a twinge of guilt. My children would be hurt when they discovered my deception. But they had hurt me too, hadn't they? By forgetting one of the most significant birthdays of my life? No, that wasn't fair. They hadn't meant to hurt me. They were just busy, distracted by their own lives. My journey wasn't about revenge. It was about finally putting myself first after a lifetime of putting others before me. Before going to sleep, I sent one last text to Gladys. "Leaving for Paris tomorrow. If the kids call, Florida is lovely and Martha says hello." Gladys replied, immediately, "Your secret's safe with me, world traveler. Knock 'em dead in Paris. Remember my scandalous souvenir." The next morning, I checked out of my hotel and took a taxi to St. Pancras Station. The Eurostar terminal was crowded and confusing, but I had plenty of time and found my way to the correct platform without too much difficulty. As the train prepared to depart, I settled into my seat and opened the guidebook to the Paris section. The City of Light awaited, and after that, Amsterdam, Berlin, Vienna, Venice, and finally Rome. 6 weeks, 6 countries, countless new experiences. The train pulled out of the station, gathering speed as it headed toward the Channel Tunnel. I watched London recede through the window, marveling at how comfortable I had become in just 3 days. If I could navigate London alone, surely I could handle Paris and beyond. As the countryside replaced the city, I felt a surge of anticipation. Each mile was taking me further from the person I had been, reliable, predictable Eleanor, and closer to the person I was becoming. Someone who took chances, someone who puts herself first occasionally, someone who would have stories to tell. When she finally returned home, the thought of those stories and the expressions on my children's faces when they heard them made me smile. They had forgotten my birthday, but in doing so, they had given me an unexpected gift, the push I needed to finally live out my dreams. Next stop, Paris. The announcement came in both English and French. Next stop, indeed. But this journey was about more than destinations on a map. It was about discovering that even at 80, there were still new beginnings waiting for those brave enough to seek them. I closed my eyes, feeling the gentle rhythm of the train as it sped toward France. My European adventure had truly begun, and I couldn't wait to see what happened next. Paris greeted me with unexpected warmth for late October. As I emerged from Gare du Nord, the afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the city, making even the most mundane buildings look magical. I had arranged for a taxi to take me to my accommodation, a small family-run pension in the Marais district that Gladys had recommended. "You must stay in the Marais," she had insisted during our planning session. "It's authentic Paris, not touristy." Paris. The taxi driver, an older gentleman named Henri, smiled knowingly when I gave him the address. "Ah, Madame Beaumont's pension. You have chosen well. First time in Paris?" When I confirmed it was, Henri took it upon himself to become my unofficial tour guide, pointing out landmarks as we drove through the city. Notre Dame, very sad about the fire. Louvre on your right, too big, you need a month to see it all. And there, the Eiffel Tower. I pressed my face against the window like an excited child, catching my first glimpse of the iconic structure in the distance. Roger had promised to bring me here for our 40th wedding anniversary. We had been married 38 years when he died. The pension was tucked away on a narrow cobblestone street lined with cafes and small shops. Madame Beaumont, a sprightly woman in her 70s with silver hair and bright blue eyes, welcomed me as if I were a long-lost friend rather than a paying guest. "Ah, Eleanor from America. Gladys told me you were coming. She said you are an adventurous soul." Her English was heavily accented but perfectly understandable. "I'm not sure about being adventurous," I admitted. "Just determined." Madame Beaumont's eyes twinkled. "At our age, Madame, determination is the greatest adventure of all." My room was on the 2nd floor, or 1st floor as the French called it. It was small but charming, with a wrought iron bed, antique furniture, and a tiny balcony overlooking the street below. The bathroom was modern, thankfully, with good lighting and grab bars beside the toilet and shower. "Gladys mentioned you have some arthritis," Madame Beaumont explained, noticing my appreciation of these details. "My late husband had the same. I know what helps." After helping me settle in, she invited me to join her for an early dinner in the small dining room downstairs. "Proper French food," she promised. Not the tourist version. Too tired to venture out on my own that first evening, I gratefully accepted. Over a simple but delicious meal of coq au vin, crusty bread, and a glass of red wine, Madame Beaumont and I exchanged life stories. Like me, She had been widowed after a long and happy marriage. Unlike me, she had no children. My Henri and I, we could not have children, she explained without self-pity. So we made this pension our family, and our guests our children. Some come back year after year. When I told her about my children forgetting my birthday and my subsequent decision to travel to Europe, she nodded approvingly. Good. They will appreciate you more when you return, if you return. Of course I'll return, I laughed. My home is in Connecticut. Madame Beaumont shrugged eloquently, a quintessentially French gesture. Perhaps, or perhaps you will discover, that home is where you feel most alive. Her words stayed with me as I prepared for bed that night. Where did I feel most alive? For decades, it had been in my role as wife and mother. Then, after Roger died, I had settled into the comfortable identity of the self-sufficient widow and doting grandmother. But those roles had begun to feel constricting, like a sweater that no longer fit properly but was too familiar to discard. Here in Paris, anonymous and unencumbered by expectations, I felt a freedom I hadn't known since youth. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. I slept deeply that night, lulled by the distant sounds of Parisian nightlife and the comfortable bed. In the morning, I dressed with care in a pair of navy slacks, a light sweater, and the comfortable walking shoes I'd purchased for the trip. I added a scarf, an inexpensive one I'd bought at a department store back home, but which looked suitably European to my untrained eye. Breakfast was served in the small garden behind the pension. Fresh croissants, strong coffee, and a bowl of ripe berries fortified me for my first day of exploration. Madame Beaumont provided a map, marking her recommended walking route with a red pen. This will take you through beautiful streets to the Seine, then to Notre Dame. You can see the outside, of course, though the inside is still closed for repairs, then along the river to the Louvre. Not too far for your first day and many benches to rest if needed. Armed with her map, my camera, and a sense of adventure, I set out into the Parisian morning. The Marais was just waking up, shopkeepers arranging their displays, cafe owners setting up outdoor tables, locals walking briskly to work or school. I strolled slowly, savoring the sights, sounds, and smells that were so distinctly different from home. I passed a small boulangerie where the aroma of fresh bread was too tempting to resist. Using my rudimentary French, practiced diligently, on a language app in the weeks before my trip, I purchased a small chocolate pastry which the baker called a pain au chocolat. I ate it as I walked, the buttery layers melting in my mouth. Following Madame Beaumont's map, I made my way through charming streets until I reached the Seine. The river flowed serenely through the heart of the city, flanked by elegant buildings and crossed by ornate bridges. Notre Dame stood on its island, scaffolded but still majestic. I found a bench facing the cathedral and sat for a while, watching boats glide past and tourists take photos. A young couple nearby were taking selfies, struggling to fit both themselves and Notre Dame in the frame. "Would you like me to take your picture?" I offered. They looked surprised, perhaps that an elderly woman would approach them, or perhaps that I spoke English, but handed over their phone gratefully. I took several shots, making sure the cathedral was perfectly framed behind them. "Thank you so much," the woman said. "Are you visiting too?" Her companion nudged her. "Of course she is, Jen. She speaks English." "I could be an expat," I said, with a smile. "But yes, I'm visiting. My first time in Paris." They introduced themselves as Jennifer and Alex from Toronto on their honeymoon. When I told them I was traveling alone at 80, they seemed amazed. "My grandmother won't even go to the mall without my grandfather," Jennifer said. "Well, my husband promised to bring me to Paris, but he passed away before we could come, so I'm here for both of us." Alex's expression softened. "That's really beautiful. Can we buy you a coffee or something? We're heading to that cafe over there." I accepted their invitation, and over coffee they showed me their Paris itinerary, pointing out highlights I shouldn't miss. They were so earnest in their desire to help that I didn't have the heart to tell them I had my own carefully researched plan. As we parted ways, Jennifer impulsively hugged me. "I hope when I'm your age, I'm still having adventures." "Why wait?" I replied. "Have them now, too." I continued along the Seine toward the Louvre, stopping frequently to take photos or simply absorb the beauty around me. The massive museum loomed ahead, its glass pyramid gleaming in the sunlight. I had planned to visit it the following day. Today was just for wandering and getting my bearings. By early afternoon, my feet were protesting, and I found a small cafe for lunch. The menu was entirely in French, but the waiter, seeing my confusion, patiently explained each dish in English. I ordered a croque madame, essentially a grilled ham and cheese sandwich topped with an egg, and another glass of wine. The food was simple but delicious, the flavors more vibrant than similar dishes at home. As I ate, I checked my phone for the first time that day. There was a text from Gladys. "James called looking for you. Told him you were on a boat trip with Martha." "All good here." I felt a twinge of guilt about the deception, but pushed it aside. I would tell my children everything when I returned, and hopefully they would understand. Or at least forgive me. After lunch, I decided to take a taxi back to the pension for a rest before dinner. Paris was wonderful but overwhelming for a first day. The taxi driver took a different route back, pointing out the Pompidou Center with its colorful exposed pipes and escalators. "Very ugly, no?" he said. "But the important art is inside." I added it to my mental list of places to visit. Back at the pension, I took off my shoes with relief and lay down for a short nap. When I awoke, the light had changed. The golden afternoon had given way to the soft glow of early evening. Paris was transforming again. Feeling refreshed, I decided to venture out for dinner on my own. Madame Beaumont recommended a bistro just 2 blocks away. Not fancy, but authentic. "Tell Marcel I sent you." The bistro was bustling when I arrived, filled with both locals and tourists. Marcel, the owner, greeted me warmly when I mentioned Madame Beaumont and led me to a small table near the window. He recommended the Boeuf Bourguignon and selected a wine to accompany it. Both were exceptional. As I savored each bite, I observed the other diners. A family at the next table caught my attention. Parents with 3 children, all teenagers, all engrossed in their phones rather than the magnificent meal before them or the beautiful city outside the window. It reminded me, painfully, of recent dinners with my own family. The last time James and his family had visited, his children had spent the entire meal texting their friends while James checked work emails. Patricia had taken business calls during our last lunch together. Even Michael, my most attentive child, had the habit of constantly checking sports scores when we were together. When had we stopped being present for each other? And why had I accepted it as normal? The family's youngest member, a boy of about 13, suddenly looked up from his phone and caught me watching them. Instead of looking away, embarrassed, I smiled. After a moment's hesitation, he smiled back, a genuine smile that transformed his sullen teenage face. Then, to my surprise, he put down his phone and said something to his father, who also put down his device. Soon, the entire family was engaged in conversation, laughing together over some shared joke. It was a small moment, but it filled me with an unexpected hope. Perhaps it wasn't too late for my family either. Back at the pension, I found Madame Beaumont in the small sitting room reading a book. She looked up as I entered. "Ah, Eleanor, did you enjoy Marcel's cooking?" "It was wonderful," I assured her. "The best meal I've had in years." She nodded, satisfied. "Tomorrow, what are your plans?" "The Louvre in the morning, and perhaps a boat tour of the Seine in the afternoon." "Good choices. And after Paris, where does your adventure take you next?" "Amsterdam," I replied. "Then Berlin, Vienna, Venice, and Rome." Madame Beaumont's eyebrows rose. "An ambitious itinerary, but why not? We are old, But not dead, yes? I laughed. That's exactly what I told my doctor when she expressed concern about my trip. We chatted a while longer before I excused myself to prepare for bed. In my room, I opened the small balcony doors to let in the night air and the distant sounds of the city. Then, I took out my phone and, on impulse, opened the photo gallery to look at pictures of my children and grandchildren. There was James at his daughter Emma's high school graduation last year, looking proud and distinguished with his salt and pepper hair. Patricia at Christmas, elegant as always in a red dress that matched her confident personality. Michael with his arm around his wife, Kelly, and their blended family of 3 children. I loved them all so fiercely, even as I acknowledged their flaws, the same flaws I had likely passed down to them: workaholism, perfectionism, the tendency to get so caught up in daily responsibilities that we forgot to celebrate life's important moments, like my 80th birthday. But I hadn't called to remind them, had I? I'd waited, expecting them to remember on their own, then felt hurt when they didn't. Perhaps I shared some of the blame for our disconnection. This trip wasn't just about seeing Europe before it was too late. It was about rediscovering who Eleanor Thompson was beneath the roles of mother, widow, and grandmother. And maybe, just maybe, it was about learning to communicate better with my children before it was too late for that, too. With these thoughts swirling in my mind, I drifted off to sleep, lulled by the distant hum of Paris at night. The next few days passed in a blur of museums, monuments, parks, and cafes. The Louvre was indeed overwhelming. I focused on just a few galleries, promising myself a return visit someday. The Musée d'Orsay, housed in a former railway station, captivated me with its impressionist paintings. I spent a magical afternoon at the Eiffel Tower, riding the elevator to the 2nd level. The top seemed too ambitious, and gazing out over the city. Each evening, I returned to the pension with aching feet, but a full heart, sharing stories of my day with Madame Beaumont. Over a glass of wine, she became not just a host, but a friend, offering insights into French culture and helpful phrases for navigating the city. On my final day in Paris, I took the metro to Montmartre, climbing the many steps, slowly and with frequent breaks, to reach the magnificent Sacré-Cœur Basilica at the summit. The view over Paris was breathtaking, the city spreading out before me like a living map. I found a quiet corner inside the basilica, away from the tourists, and sat in contemplation. Though not particularly religious, I lit a candle for Roger. "I made it to Paris, my love," I whispered. "It's everything you said it would be." As I prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a text. It was Michael. "Hey, Mom. Tried calling Martha's house, but no answer. Everything okay?" My stomach knotted. I had been so caught up in Paris that I'd forgotten to check in with Gladys. Had she tried to cover for me? I quickly texted back, "All fine. On a day trip today. Reception spotty. We'll call tomorrow." Then I messaged Gladys. "Michael tried calling Martha's. What did you tell him?" Her reply came quickly. "Said you were probably at the beach." He seemed satisfied. "Everything still good in Florida?" I sent her a photo of the Paris skyline from my current vantage point. "Never better, but the kids are getting suspicious. Might have to come clean soon." "Or extend your trip indefinitely," came her cheeky reply. "You could become one of those glamorous American expatriates." The idea was absurd, of course, yet as I made my way down from Montmartre, stopping at a small cafe for my last Parisian lunch, I couldn't help but marvel at how comfortable I'd become in this foreign city in just 5 days. I navigated the metro with confidence, ordered food in my rudimentary French, and walked the streets without constant reference to my map. Travel had awakened something in me that had been dormant for years, a sense of curiosity, adaptability, and joy in the unfamiliar. It made me wonder what else I was capable of that I had never attempted. That evening, as I packed for Amsterdam, Madame Beaumont knocked on my door. "A small gift," she said, handing me a beautifully wrapped package. To remember Paris. Inside was a silk scarf in shades of blue and green. It matches your eyes, she explained, much better than the one you brought from America. I was touched by her thoughtfulness and slightly embarrassed that my attempt at European style had been so transparent. It's beautiful, thank you. You will come back to Paris, she said with certainty. And when you do, you will stay with me. Again, yes? Yes, I promised, meaning it. And next time, perhaps I'll bring my family. Her eyebrows rose. If they deserve to come, she said with a wink. As I settled into bed that night, my last in Paris, I reflected on the journey ahead. Amsterdam tomorrow, with its canals and museums. Then Berlin, Vienna, Venice, and finally Rome. I was only a quarter of the way through my grand adventure, yet already I felt transformed. Whatever happened when I returned home, whether my children were angry, hurt, or understanding about my deception, I knew I would face it as this new version of myself. Eleanor Thompson, traveler. Eleanor Thompson, adventurer. Eleanor Thompson, woman of the world. With that thought, I closed my eyes, eager for the next chapter of my unexpected journey to begin. Amsterdam welcomed me with rain, a gentle, persistent drizzle that glistened on the cobblestones and rippled across the canals. My train from Paris had arrived in the early afternoon, and as I emerged from Amsterdam Central Station, the city spread before me like an intricate watercolor painting, its colors softened by the mist. Unlike Paris, where I had splurged on taxi rides, in Amsterdam I had arranged for a canal boat to take me to my accommodation. The boat captain, a weathered man named Dirk with a salt and pepper beard, helped me aboard with a strong, steady hand. "First visit to Amsterdam?" he asked as we pulled away from the dock. I nodded, mesmerized by the passing scenery. Narrow houses, leaning slightly forward, their ornate gables reaching toward the cloudy sky. Bicycles parked in clusters along the canal edges, and countless bridges arching over the waterways. "Most visitors come in spring for the tulips," Dirk commented. "But autumn has its own beauty. Fewer tourists, more authentic." My accommodation in Amsterdam was a small apartment above a bookstore, rented from a retired professor named Henrik who lived next door. His wife had passed away 2 years earlier, and he supplemented his pension by renting out the apartment that had once belonged to their daughter. "Annika lives in New Zealand now," he explained as he showed me around. "Married a Kiwi and never came back. Except to visit, of course." There was a hint of sadness beneath his jovial manner. The apartment was cozy and filled with books, overflowing from shelves, stacked on tables, and piled beside the comfortable-looking armchair near the window overlooking the canal. Henrik had thoughtfully stocked the small refrigerator with essentials: milk, cheese, bread, and a bowl of fresh fruit. "I thought you might be tired after your journey," he said. "There's a cafe downstairs if you want something hot later. They make excellent soup." After Henrik left, I unpacked my few belongings and settled into the armchair by the window, watching boats glide past on the canal below and people hurrying along the narrow street, huddled under umbrellas. The rain had intensified, rendering any exploration unlikely until morning. I took out my phone and saw a missed call from Patricia. Before I could decide whether to return it, a text message arrived. "Mom, called Martha's again. Her neighbor said she's been in the hospital for the past month. Where are you, really?" My heart raced. The deception was unraveling faster than I had anticipated. I had planned to complete my journey before revealing my whereabouts, but that was no longer possible. Still, I wasn't ready to confess everything, just yet. I typed a careful reply. "I'm fine, Patricia. I decided to take a little detour. We'll explain everything when I get back. Please don't worry." Her response was immediate. "A detour where? Mom, we're all worried sick. Tell us where you are or we're filing a missing person report." The threat was clear, and knowing Patricia entirely serious. I sighed and called her. Mom. Her voice was a mixture of relief and anger. Where on earth are you? I'm in Amsterdam, I said simply. There was a long silence. Amsterdam as in the Netherlands? Europe? Yes, that Amsterdam. I'm on a European tour. I'm perfectly fine, as you can hear. But why? And why did you lie about being with Martha? Did you know James was about to fly to Florida to check on you? I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of guilt. I'm sorry for worrying you. I didn't plan to lie, at least not for this long. It just happened. What happened, Mom? I don't understand. The concern in her voice made my throat tighten. My birthday happened, Patricia. Or rather, it didn't happen. None of you remembered my 80th birthday. Not a call, not a card, nothing. There was another silence, this one heavier. Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry, with the case and everything. But that's no excuse. We should have remembered. It's all right, I said, surprised to find I genuinely meant it. It hurt at the time. But now, I'm grateful. It gave me the push I needed to finally do something I've always wanted to do. Tour Europe alone at 80? There was a hint of her lawyer's skepticism in her tone. See the places your father and I always dreamed of seeing together. Live a little adventure before it's too late. The line went quiet again, but I could hear her breathing. Finally, she asked, Are you really okay? Do you need anything? Should one of us fly out to join you? I'm more than okay, I assured her. I'm having the time of my life. And no, I don't need anyone to join me. This is something I need to do on my own. Where else are you going? How long will you be gone? I explained my itinerary and 6-week timeline. To my surprise, Patricia didn't try to talk me out of continuing the journey. Instead, she asked practical questions about my accommodations, health precautions, and emergency contacts. We were horrible to forget your birthday, she said at last. All of us. We've been talking about it since we found out you weren't in Florida. James feels terrible. Michael's been calling hospitals. I never meant to frighten you, I said. I just wanted some time for myself without having to explain or defend my choices. I understand, Patricia said, though I wasn't sure she really did. Just promise you'll check in regularly so we know you're safe. And Mom, happy belated birthday. I love you. After we hung up, I sat for a long time watching the rain and the lights reflecting on the canal water. A weight had lifted. No more deception, no more worried texts from Gladys about covering for me. Yet I felt a twinge of disappointment, too. The secret adventure had become just an adventure, subject to my children's concern and, inevitably, their judgment. My phone buzzed again, a group text from James to all of us. Just talked to Patricia. Mom's in Amsterdam? Is she having a late-life crisis? Before I could respond, Michael replied, Cut her some slack. We all forgot her 80th birthday. I'd be pissed, too. Patricia added, She sounded great, actually. Really happy. I say we let her have this adventure. She deserves it. I smiled at my phone, unexpectedly moved by Michael and Patricia's support. Perhaps my children understood me better than I'd given them credit for. James conceded, Fine, but I'm tracking her phone GPS. Just in case. I laughed out loud. Typical James. Always the protector. Always needing to be in control. I typed a quick response. I can see this group text, you know. No need to track me. I'll check in every day. And James, it's not a crisis. It's a vacation. Love you all. With that matter settled, I ventured downstairs to the cafe Henrik had recommended. The rain had diminished to a light drizzle, and the short walk was refreshing after the long train journey. The cafe was warm and inviting, with mismatched furniture and bookshelves lining the walls. An extension of the bookstore, it seemed. The owner, a woman about my age with short gray hair and bright red glasses, greeted me warmly. You must be Henrik's new guest. I'm Lena. Welcome to Amsterdam. I introduced myself, and Lena insisted I try their specialty, Dutch pea soup with rye bread. It was hearty and delicious, perfect for the damp evening. As I ate, Lena joined me during a lull in customers. Henrik tells me you're traveling alone through Europe. That takes courage. Or foolishness, I said with a smile. My children certainly think so. Lena waved dismissively. Children always think they know what's best for their parents. My daughter wanted me to sell this cafe after my husband died. Said it was too much work at my age. She gestured around the bustling space. But this place keeps me alive. Without it, I would just be an old woman waiting to die. Her bluntness was refreshing after weeks of people treating me with careful politeness due to my age. That's exactly why I'm traveling now, I confessed. I don't want to just wait around for the end. Lena nodded approvingly. Good for you. Now, what do you want to see in Amsterdam? The usual museums, I assume? The Rijksmuseum, Van Gogh Museum, and Anne Frank House are on my list, and I'd like to take a canal tour. All good choices. But you should also see the hidden Amsterdam, the places tourists miss. She pulled out a small map and circled several locations. This courtyard, the Begijnhof, beautiful and peaceful. This street market, local, not touristy. And this cafe has the best apple cake in the city. By the time I returned to my apartment, I had a customized Amsterdam itinerary courtesy of Lena and a standing invitation to join her for coffee each morning before starting my day's exploration. The next 3 days were a delight despite occasional rain showers. True to my promise, I texted my children each morning with my plans and each evening with a photo or two from the day's adventures. Their responses evolved from concerned checks on my well-being to genuine interest in what I was seeing and doing. The museums were everything I had hoped for. Standing before Rembrandt's The Night Watch in the Rijksmuseum, I felt a connection across centuries to the artist whose work I had taught about but never seen in person. Van Gogh's swirling brushstrokes in Sunflowers and The Bedroom brought tears to my eyes, the raw emotion of his work even more powerful in reality than in reproductions. The Anne Frank house was a profoundly moving experience. As I climbed the steep stairs to the secret annex where the Frank family had hidden, I thought about the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of bearing witness to both the darkness and light of history. Between museum visits, I followed Lena's recommendations, discovering quiet corners of the city where locals outnumbered tourists. I sampled Dutch cheeses at a small market, watched master craftsmen create delicate blue and white Delftware pottery, and yes, ate the best apple cake I'd ever tasted at the cafe she had marked on my map. Each evening, I returned to Henrik's apartment tired but exhilarated, my camera full of new images and my heart full of new experiences. Henrik often invited me for tea, eager to hear about my day and to share stories of his own travels with his late wife. Johanna would have liked you, he told me on my final evening in Amsterdam. She always said age was just a number that meant nothing unless you allowed it to define you. Your Johanna sounds like a wise woman, I replied. The wisest, he agreed. I miss her intellect as much as her heart. He paused, looking at me curiously. What does your husband think of your solo adventure? Roger has been gone 12 years now, I explained. He always wanted to show me Europe, but we waited too long. I like to think he's with me somehow, seeing it all through my eyes. Henrik nodded. That's how I feel about Johanna whenever I visit a place we plan to see together. Not in a mystical sense, but in the way we carry those we love with us always. We sat in companionable silence for a moment before Henrik asked, And tomorrow you leave for Berlin? Yes, another train journey. I'm looking forward to it. Berlin is a city of contrasts. Beauty and tragedy, history and modernity all layered together. You will find it Challenging, perhaps, but worthwhile. The next morning, Lena insisted on accompanying me to the train station, bringing a package of her famous apple cake for the journey. Henrik presented me with a small book of Dutch poetry translated into English. "Something to remember us by," he said. As the train pulled away from Amsterdam, I felt a pang of regret at leaving. In just 4 days, I had developed a genuine affection for the city and its people. But Berlin beckoned, and my European adventure was far from over. The train journey through the Dutch and German countryside was peaceful, giving me time to reflect on the first half of my trip. I had now been away from home for nearly 3 weeks. The person who had left Connecticut, hurt by her children's forgetfulness and impulsively seeking escape, seemed like a stranger to me now. I had discovered a confidence and adaptability I hadn't known I possessed. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "How's the train? James wants to know if you remembered to book a car from the Berlin station to your hotel. He's worried about you taking the subway with your luggage." I smiled at James's typical overconcern, but was touched by his thoughtfulness. "Train lovely, hotel sending car to station, all arranged. Tell James not to worry." Berlin greeted me with bright autumn sunshine, a striking contrast to Amsterdam's gentle rain. The hotel car was indeed waiting, the driver holding a sign with Mrs. Thompson clearly printed. The driver, a young woman with a short blonde pixie cut, introduced herself as Katja. "Welcome to Berlin, Mrs. Thompson. Your hotel is about 30 minutes from here, depending on traffic. Is this your first visit to our city?" When I confirmed it was, Katja transformed from driver to enthusiastic tour guide, pointing out landmarks and offering historical context as we drove. Her English was nearly perfect, with just enough of an accent to remind me I was in a foreign country. My hotel in Berlin was more conventional than my previous accommodations, a mid-sized establishment in what Katja informed me was the Mitte district, central and convenient for sightseeing. After the intimacy of Madame Beaumont's pension and Henrik's apartment, the hotel felt anonymous, but the reception staff were welcoming, and my room was comfortable with a view of a small park. After settling in, I ventured out for an exploratory walk, armed with a map from the hotel concierge. The streets around my hotel were a fascinating mix of restored historic buildings and modern architecture. People hurried past, purposeful and direct in a way that reminded me more of New York than the more leisurely pace of Paris or Amsterdam. Found a small restaurant for dinner, where the waiter recommended the schnitzel and a local beer. As I ate, I texted my daily check-in to my children, including a photo of my meal. Michael responded immediately. "That looks amazing. Better than the frozen pizza I'm having. Enjoy Berlin, Mom. Tom says hi." The casual normalcy of the exchange warmed me. Perhaps this journey was healing more than just my sense of adventure. It seemed to be repairing something in my relationships with my children as well. The next morning, I joined a walking tour focused on Berlin's complex history. Our guide, Stefan, was a history professor who led tours as a hobby to keep history alive. Over 4 hours, he led our small group through the layers of Berlin's past, from Prussian glory through Nazi terror, Cold War division, to reunification and renewal. Standing before the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe, I was moved by the undulating field of concrete slabs that created a sense of disorientation and isolation. At the Berlin Wall Memorial, Stefan explained how families had been torn apart overnight, showing us heartbreaking photos of people waving to relatives across the newly erected barrier. "Berlin doesn't hide its scars," Stefan told us. "We believe in remembering honestly, both the good and the terrible. It's the only way to move forward." His words stayed with me as I continued exploring the city over the next 3 days. I visited museums that documented both artistic achievement and human cruelty, cathedrals rebuilt from rubble, and gleaming modern government buildings constructed after reunification. At Checkpoint Charlie, I watched tourists take selfies with actors dressed as American soldiers. At the East Side Gallery, I admired the vibrant murals painted on a preserved section of the wall. Everywhere, I saw a city that had confronted its past and was determinedly building a new future. On my second evening in Berlin, James called rather than texted. "How's Berlin, Mom? Is your hotel okay? Do you feel safe walking around?" "Everything's fine, James," I assured him. "Berlin feels very safe, even for an old lady like me." "You're not old," he said automatically, then caught himself. "Well, you are, but not in the ways that matter. I've been thinking a lot about what you said to Patricia, about us forgetting your birthday being the push you needed for this trip." "It's true," I said. "Sometimes it takes disappointment to make you realize what you really want. Still, we should have remembered. It was your 80th, for God's sake." His voice was heavy with self-reproach. Did we really all become so wrapped up in our own lives that we forgot the woman who raised us? "James," I said gently, "I didn't tell you about this trip to make you feel guilty. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them." "What I've learned," he said slowly, "is that I don't know you as well as I thought. The mom I thought I knew wouldn't hop on a plane to Europe alone at 80. She'd wait for one of us to take her. Maybe I didn't know myself as well as I thought either," I admitted. People can surprise themselves at any age. Our conversation continued, deeper and more honest than any we'd had in years. For the first time, James spoke to me not as an aging parent to be managed, but as a person with valid dreams and capabilities. It was a subtle shift, but a profound one. The next day, as I stood atop the Reichstag dome, looking out over the sprawling city, I thought about James's words. Had my children seen me as I really was, or only as who they needed me to be? Had I been complicit in that limited vision, playing the role of the predictable, dependable mother who would never do anything unexpected? Here, surrounded by visitors from around the world, in a building that had witnessed the sweep of history, these questions seemed both important and irrelevant. I was who I was, Eleanor Thompson, 80 years young, standing in Berlin because I had chosen to be here. And that, I realized, was enough. The train from Berlin to Vienna was a 7-hour journey through landscapes that transformed from the flat plains of northern Germany to the gentle hills of Austria. I had booked a first-class seat, another indulgence that my former self would have considered frivolous, but that my traveling self recognized as a necessity for comfort. As the train sped south, I gazed out the window at small villages with onion-domed churches, forests beginning to blaze with autumn colors, and occasionally, a distant castle perched on a hilltop. I had brought a book, a novel set in Vienna that I'd purchased at Henrik's bookstore, but found the passing scenery far more captivating. A couple in their 60s sat across from me, speaking German, until the woman noticed me and switched to English. "Are you traveling to Vienna?" she asked with a friendly smile. When I confirmed I was, she introduced herself as Ingrid and her husband as Klaus. They were from Munich, visiting their daughter who was studying music in Vienna. "Vienna is perfect for music lovers," Ingrid said. "Are you interested in classical music?" "Very much so," I replied. "I have tickets for a concert at the Musikverein tomorrow night." Klaus nodded approvingly. "Excellent choice. The acoustics are superb." "Which orchestra?" "The Vienna Philharmonic. They're performing Mahler's Fifth Symphony." "Ah, Mahler in Vienna." "As it should be." Klaus's eyes lit up. "You must also visit the State Opera if you can. Even if you don't attend a performance, the building itself is magnificent." For the remainder of the journey, Klaus and Ingrid shared their extensive knowledge of Vienna, suggesting lesser-known museums, the best cafes for authentic Viennese pastries, and how to navigate the efficient public transportation system. By the time we reached Vienna Hauptbahnhof, I had a notebook full of recommendations and 2 new friends who insisted on exchanging email addresses. "You must tell us what you think of Mahler," Klaus said as we parted ways. "And if you need anything." During your stay, please don't hesitate to contact us. Their kindness touched me. Throughout my journey, I had encountered so many people who, rather than treating me with the dismissive politeness often reserved for elderly tourists, had embraced me as a fellow traveler worthy of respect and genuine connection. In Vienna, I had booked a room in a family-run pension located in a historic building in the Innere Stadt, the city's central district. The pension Mozart, aptly named, I thought, was on the third floor of a 19th-century building with, thankfully, a small elevator that creaked its way upward with reassuring determination. Frau Weber, the owner, was a stately woman in her beau 70s with impeccable posture and silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. She greeted me in formal, accented English, and showed me to a high-ceilinged room furnished with antiques that looked as though they had been there since the days of the Habsburg Empire. Breakfast is served from 7 to 10, she informed me. The bathroom is private, but please be mindful of the hot water. The building is old, and the tanks are not as large as in modern hotels. After she left, I opened the tall windows to let in the late afternoon air and the sounds of the city. Vienna had a different rhythm than Berlin, less hurried, more measured, as if the city itself were moving to the tempo of a Strauss waltz. I unpacked my now familiar traveling wardrobe and headed out for an early dinner. Following one of Ingrid's recommendations, I found a traditional Viennese restaurant just a short walk from the pension. Over a delicious meal of Wiener Schnitzel, I checked my phone and found a text from Patricia. "How was the train ride? Vienna looks beautiful in the, photos I've been researching. Wish I was there with you." I smiled at this new development. My daughter, the busy lawyer, taking time to research Vienna just to share in my experience. I sent her a photo of my dinner and a brief description of the day's journey. The next morning, after a breakfast of strong coffee, fresh rolls, and apricot jam in the pension's formal dining room, I set out to explore Vienna on foot. Frau Weber had assured me that most of the major sites were within walking distance, though she had pressed a transportation map into my hand, just in case. Vienna in autumn was a visual feast. The imperial architecture, ornate, cream-colored, buildings adorned with statues and gold accents, gleamed in the morning sunlight. Horse-drawn carriages clip-clopped through the streets alongside modern vehicles, creating a charming juxtaposition of old and new. I began at St. Stephen's Cathedral, its distinctive diamond-patterned roof visible from nearly everywhere in the central district. Inside, the soaring Gothic arches and colorful stained-glass windows created an atmosphere of reverent beauty. I lit a candle for Roger, continuing what had become a tradition in each city's most significant church. From there, I strolled along the Graben, an elegant pedestrian street lined with high-end shops and cafes. Though tempted by the window displays, I reminded myself that my suitcase had limited space. Instead, I treated myself to a mid-morning break at Café Central, one of Vienna's famous coffee houses. The cafe was a marvel of marble columns, vaulted ceilings, and plush velvet seating. I ordered a melange, similar to a cappuccino, and a slice of Sachertorte, the famous chocolate cake created for Prince Metternich in 1832. As I savored each bite, I observed my fellow patrons, a mix of tourists and locals, some reading newspapers, others engaged in animated conversation, all partaking in the Viennese coffeehouse tradition that had endured for centuries. An elderly gentleman at the next table, noticing my guidebook, leaned over. "First time in Vienna?" he asked in perfect English. When I nodded, he introduced himself as Joseph, a retired music professor. "You have chosen a perfect time to visit. Fewer tourists, beautiful light for photography, and the new opera season just beginning." Our conversation meandered from Viennese musical history to American politics to the challenges and joys of aging. Joseph, at 85, still attended concerts weekly and taught piano to select students. "The secret," he confided, "is to never stop learning. Never stop experiencing beauty. Too many of my contemporaries retired from life when they retired from work. His words resonated deeply with me. Wasn't that exactly what I had been doing before this trip? Retiring from life, settling into a comfortable but narrowing existence? Joseph insisted on writing down the names of several musicians to look for in recordings, the true interpreters of our Viennese composers, and recommended a small wine tavern in the Grinzing district if I had time to venture outside the city center. After leaving the cafe, I continued my exploration, visiting the Hofburg Palace with its imperial apartments and treasury, and the Albertina Museum with its impressive collection of Dürer prints and modernist masterpieces. Everywhere, history surrounded me, not as a dusty relic, but as a living presence woven into the fabric of the contemporary city. By late afternoon, I returned to the pension to rest before the evening's concert. I had purchased a new dress for the occasion, nothing extravagant, but more formal than my usual traveling clothes. The Musikverein deserved the respect of proper attire. As I dressed, I reflected on how differently I was approaching this trip, compared to my normal routine at home. In Connecticut, I rarely went out in the evenings anymore. The effort of driving after dark, finding parking, and navigating unfamiliar venues had begun to seem too daunting. Yet here I was in Vienna, preparing to attend a world-class concert alone in a foreign city, and feeling nothing but anticipation. The Musikverein was even more beautiful than photographs had suggested. The famous Golden Hall lived up to its name, with gilt decorations catching the light and creating an atmosphere of sumptuous elegance. My seat was in the middle of the hall, not the most expensive but with an excellent view of the orchestra. As the musicians took their places and the first notes of Mahler's symphony filled the hall, I closed my eyes briefly, allowing the music to wash over me. Roger and I had often listened to classical music together, though we had rarely attended live performances. He would have loved this moment. The perfect acoustics, the precision of the orchestra, the emotional sweep of Mahler's composition. During intermission, I found myself standing near a young couple who were discussing the performance in English with American accents. They smiled at me, and the woman asked, "Are you enjoying the concert?" "Immensely," I replied. "It's my first time at the Musikverein." "Ours too," said the man. "We're on our honeymoon. Classical music isn't usually my thing, but Katie insisted. And I have to admit, it's pretty amazing in person. Much better than the Spotify playlist I made him listen to," Katie laughed. "I'm a music teacher, so this is basically my pilgrimage." Their youthful enthusiasm was contagious, and we chatted until the bells signaled the end of intermission. As we returned to our seats, Katie impulsively squeezed my hand. "I hope when we've been married for decades, we're still having adventures together like you and your husband must be." I didn't correct her assumption. Somehow, in that moment, it felt as though Roger truly was with me, sharing this experience across the divide that separated us. The next 2 days in Vienna passed in a blur of palaces, museums, gardens, and, of course, cafes. I visited the Schönbrunn Palace with its magnificent rooms and extensive gardens, the Belvedere housing Gustav Klimt's famous The Kiss, and the Naschmarkt, a vibrant outdoor market where I sampled local specialties and purchased small gifts for my children and Gladys. I even ventured out to Grinzing one evening, following Joseph's recommendation. The small wine tavern, or Uriger, was exactly as he had described, cozy, authentic, and far from the tourist circuit. I sat at a communal table, sharing a bench with a local couple who, despite limited English, made me feel welcome and helped me navigate the menu of local wines and rustic food. On my final morning in Vienna, I received a surprising text from Michael. "Mom, don't freak out, but I'm thinking of joining you in Venice. Kelly can handle the kids for a few days, and I've got some vacation time. Would that be okay, or would it ruin your solo adventure?" I stared at the phone, unsure how to respond. Part of me was touched by Michael's desire to share my journey, but another part was protective of this independent experience I had created for myself. After careful consideration, I typed, "I'd love to see you in Venice, but only for part of my time there. This trip has been about discovering what I can do on my own. I'm not ready to give that up entirely. His response came quickly. Totally understand. How about I come for just 2 days? You can show me your favorite spots, and then I'll fly home. And let you continue your adventure. No pressure. That sounds perfect, I replied, meaning it. The idea of sharing some of this journey with one of my children, now that they understood what it meant to me, felt like a natural evolution rather than an intrusion. With that happy development to look forward to, I packed my suitcase and bid farewell to Frau Weber, who surprised me with a small package of Viennese chocolates for the journey. The train to Venice would take about 6 hours, crossing the Alps and descending into Italy. Another country, another language, another chapter in my unexpected adventure. The journey from Vienna to Venice was perhaps the most spectacular train ride of my entire trip. As we climbed into the Alps, the landscape transformed from gentle Austrian countryside to dramatic mountain vistas. Snow-capped peaks towered above alpine meadows where cattle grazed, their bells faintly audible when the train slowed for curves in the track. I kept my camera ready, trying to capture the breathtaking scenery, though no photograph could truly do justice to the majesty of the mountains or the play of light on distant glaciers. The woman seated across from me, an Austrian returning home to Venice after visiting family, smiled at my attempts. "It never gets old," she said. "I've made this journey dozens of times, and still, I can't look away from the window." After crossing the border into Italy, the train began its descent, winding through valleys where tile-roofed villages clustered. Around church steeples and vineyards terraced the lower slopes. The language announcements on the train switched from German to Italian, and even the quality of light seemed to change. Warmer, more golden, quintessentially Mediterraneans. We approached Venice, excitement built within me. Of all the cities on my itinerary, Venice had held the most romantic appeal for Roger and me. We had dreamed of gondola rides through narrow canals, of St. Mark's Square at sunset, of getting lost in the labyrinthine streets. Now I would experience it all for both of us. The train crossed the long causeway connecting the mainland to the island city, and suddenly we were pulling into Venezia Santa Lucia station. I gathered my belongings, took a deep breath, and stepped off the train into a world unlike any I had seen before. Instead of taxis waiting outside the station, there were water buses, vaporetti, and private water taxis bobbing gently at wooden docks. The Grand Canal stretched before me, its green waters reflecting the facades of palazzos in shades of rose, ochre, and cream. The late afternoon sun turned everything golden, and the air carried the faint scent of salt water and age. I had booked a room in a small hotel on a quiet canal away from the main tourist areas, recommended by a friend of Gladys who visited Venice annually. The hotel had arranged a water taxi to meet me, and a young man holding a sign with my name approached as I exited the station. "Signora Thompson, benvenuta a Venezia. This way, please." The water taxi was a sleek wooden craft with a covered cabin. As we pulled away from the dock and entered the Grand Canal, I felt a surge of pure joy. The city was more beautiful, more dreamlike than any photograph had suggested. Palaces and churches lined the waterway, their reflections shimmering on the surface. Gondolas glided past, some carrying tourists, others delivering goods to businesses accessible only by water. My hotel, Ca Serenissima, was located in the Dorsoduro district, away from the crowds of San Marco, but still within walking distance of major attractions. The building had once been a merchant's home, its entrance now a small dock where our taxi pulled up. The manager, Signor Ricci, greeted me himself and showed me to a room with a window overlooking a narrow canal, where gondolas occasionally passed. "Venice can be confusing," he warned me. "Many tourists get lost, but this is part of the charm, no? Here is a map, but sometimes it is better to wander and discover." After settling in, I texted Michael my hotel information and confirmed his arrival in 2 days' time. Then, despite the fatigue of travel, I couldn't resist venturing out for a first glimpse of the city in the fading daylight. Venice at dusk was magical. Street lamps cast warm pools of light on ancient stones, and the water in the canals turned from green to deep blue to black as night fell. I walked without any particular destination, crossing small bridges, discovering tiny squares, campii, learned they were called, and passing shops displaying exquisite glasswork from the nearby island of Murano. Eventually, I found a small restaurant tucked away on a side canal. The waiter seated me at a table near the window and recommended the seafood risotto, a Venetian specialty. As I savored the dish, rich with the flavors of the lagoon, I observed a young couple at a nearby table. They were clearly in love, hands intertwined on the table, speaking softly in Italian. They reminded me of Roger and me in our early years, that same absorption in each other, that sense that the world existed only as a backdrop to our story. For the first time in years, the memory brought more pleasure than pain. Yes, my time with Roger had been cut short, but what we had shared had been genuine and deep. And now, in the city we had dreamed of visiting together, I felt his presence not as a ghost, but as a companion in spirit. Back at the hotel, I sat by my window for a long time, watching the occasional boat pass by and listening to the gentle lapping of water against stone. Venice, more than any other city I had visited, seemed to exist in a space between past and present, a living museum, yet vibrantly alive with contemporary energy. The next morning brought sunshine and mild temperatures, perfect for exploration. After breakfast in the hotel's small courtyard, I set out toward St. Mark's Square, the historic heart of Venice. Signor Ricci had shown me the route on a map, warning me about several confusing turns, but assuring me that all paths eventually lead to San Marco. He was right about the confusing turns, and despite my best efforts, I soon found myself in an unfamiliar square with no idea which direction to go. Rather than feeling anxious, however, I embraced the opportunity to discover the Venice that existed beyond the guidebooks. I wandered through narrow streets where laundry hung from windows above my head, past workshops where artisans created masks for the famous Venetian carnival, and discovered a small church where an organist was practicing, filling the space with Bach fugues. Eventually, I emerged into the vastness of St. Mark's Square, momentarily overwhelmed by the scale and beauty of the space after the intimate streets I had traversed. The Byzantine splendor of St. Mark's Basilica dominated one end of the square, its multiple domes and ornate facade gleaming in the sunlight. The Campanile, bell tower, soared upward, offering views across the entire lagoon to those willing to climb or ride the elevator to its summit. Despite the many tourists taking photos and feeding the famous pigeons, the square retained its historic dignity. I joined the queue for the basilica, marveling at the golden mosaics within, and the treasure of the Pala d'Oro, an altar screen of gold and precious gems created over centuries by Byzantine goldsmiths. Later, I treated myself to coffee at Café Florian, reputedly the oldest cafe in Europe, where Casanova, Goethe, Dickens, and countless other luminaries had once sat. The prices were astronomical, clearly aimed at tourists, but the experience of sipping espresso while a small orchestra played Italian classics was worth the indulgence. As evening approached, I took a vaporetto along the Grand Canal, watching the light change on the water and the ancient buildings. Tomorrow, Michael would arrive, and I would see Venice through his eyes as well as my own. For now, though, I was content to be alone with my thoughts, floating through a city that seemed built from equal parts stone and dreams. In the gathering dusk, with lights beginning to shimmer on the water and stars appearing above the domes and towers, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not just for the beauty surrounding me, but for the forgotten birthday that had set me on this path of discovery, of ancient cities, and more importantly, of myself. I woke early on the morning of Michael's arrival, feeling an unexpected flutter of nerves. For nearly 4 weeks, I had existed in a world of my own making, answerable to no one but myself. How would it feel to have one of my children witness this new, independent version of me? After breakfast, I took the Vaporetto to the airport, where Michael's flight from Phoenix was scheduled to land at 10:30. I arrived early and found a cafe where I could watch the arrivals board while sipping an espresso. When his flight showed as landed, I positioned myself near the exit from customs. Michael emerged looking surprisingly fresh after his long journey, tall and lanky like his father, with the same crinkles around his eyes when he smiled. He spotted me immediately and enveloped me in a bear hug that lifted me slightly off my feet. "Mom, you look amazing," he exclaimed, setting me down and stepping back to examine me. "Europe agrees with you. It's the lighting," I joked, though, in truth, I had noticed changes myself. My cheeks had more color, my eyes seemed brighter, and there was a subtle shift in my posture. Straightener, more confident. "It's not the lighting," Michael insisted as we made our way to the water taxi. "Stand. You seem, I don't know, more alive somehow." "That's exactly how I feel," I admitted. "More alive than I have in years." The ride back to Venice proper gave Michael his first glimpse of the city from the water. His expression of wonder as we approached the Grand Canal mirrored what I had felt just days earlier. "This is incredible," he breathed, snapping photos with his phone. "No wonder you and Dad always wanted to come here." "He would have loved seeing you experience it," I said, surprised at how easily the words came. Mentioning Roger had become less painful during my travels, as if the journey itself was helping me carry his memory forward rather than leave it behind. I had arranged for Michael to stay at my hotel, though in a separate room. Signor Ricci greeted him warmly and insisted on personally showing him to his accommodation, a slightly larger room than mine, with a small balcony overlooking the same canal. "Even in Venice, he's still getting the better deal," I teased, remembering how Roger and I had always given Michael, our youngest, the largest slice of cake or the best seat in the car. Small indulgences that had occasionally irked his older siblings. Michael's laugh was genuine. "Some things never change, but seriously, Mom, this place is perfect. So much better than the giant tourist hotels I was looking at online." After he had freshened up, we set out to explore Venice together. I took pride in showing him my discoveries from the previous day, navigating the labyrinthine streets with growing confidence. We visited St. Mark's Square, where Michael marveled at the basilica and insisted we take the elevator to the top of the Campanile for panoramic views of the city and lagoon. "It's like a painting," he said as we gazed out at the terracotta rooftops, church domes, and the deep blue water surrounding the island city. "I can't believe it's real." For lunch, I guided him to a small Baccaro, a traditional Venetian wine bar I had discovered on my wanderings. We sampled Sacchetti, the local version of tapas, and shared a carafe of house wine. The conversation flowed easily, touching on his work, his children, and the adventures I'd had in the cities I'd already visited. "James and Patricia are so jealous." "I'm here," Michael confessed. "James especially. He keeps texting me asking for photos and updates." "He could have come too," I pointed out. "I would have welcomed any of you." Michael shook his head. "It's not that simple for them. James has those teenagers who need constant supervision, and Patricia's in the middle of another big case. But mostly, I think they're processing the fact that you did this on your own. It's shaken up how they see you. How they see me, or how they think I should be? Both, probably." Michael grinned. "It's not every day your 80-year-old mother turns into a globe-trotting adventurer." In the afternoon, I had arranged a surprise, a private gondola tour of the smaller canals, away from the main tourist routes. Our gondolier, Marco, was a third-generation Venetian who spoke excellent English and shared fascinating insights about the history and architecture of his city as he skillfully navigated the narrow waterways. "My grandfather took your grandparents on gondola rides," Marco told us. "And someday perhaps my son will take your grandchildren. This is the Venetian way, tradition passed through generations." As we glided beneath tiny bridges and past ancient doorways opening directly onto the water, I thought about how traditions could be both comforting and constraining. My own life had been shaped by traditions, the roles of wife, mother, widow, each with its prescribed behaviors and expectations. This journey was my first real break from those patterns, my first assertion that Eleanor Thompson could exist outside those well-worn channels. The gondola emerged into the Grand Canal just as the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the water and the elegant facades of palazzos. Michael, who had been snapping photos throughout the ride, put down his phone and simply watched the scene unfold. "I get it now," he said softly. "Why did you need to do this? Some things you just have to experience for yourself." That evening, we dined at a restaurant Signor Ricci had recommended, specializing in seafood fresh from the lagoon. Over plates of grilled branzino and squid ink risotto, our conversation deepened. "I need to apologize properly," Michael said, his expression serious. "Forgetting your birthday was unforgivable, especially your 80th. "I've already forgiven you," I assured him. "All of you. In a strange way, I'm grateful it happened. Otherwise, I might never have found the courage to make this journey. Still, it shouldn't have taken something like that for us to pay attention. We've been taking you for granted, Mom. Assuming you'll always be there, always understanding when. We're too busy to call or visit." His candor touched me. Of my 3 children, Michael had always been the most emotionally perceptive, the one most like Roger in his ability to acknowledge feelings without embarrassment. "We all take each other for granted sometimes," I said. "I'm guilty of it too. I've had a lot of time to think during this trip, and I've realized I could have been clearer about what I needed from all of you. I just expected you to know." "That doesn't excuse us forgetting," Michael insisted. "No, but it helps explain it. And honestly, Michael, this trip has taught me that I'm more resilient than I thought. More capable. I don't need you or James or Patricia to take care of me, at least not yet. What I need is for you to see me as I am now, not as the mother you needed when you were growing up." Michael reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm seeing you pretty clearly right now, Mom, and I like what I see." The next day, we took the Vaporetto to the islands of Murano and Burano. Murano, famous for its glass-making traditions, offered us the opportunity to watch master artisans transform molten glass into delicate sculptures and vibrant vases. In one workshop, an elderly craftsman who had been blowing glass for over 60 years created a small blue bird before our eyes, his weathered hands moving with precision born of decades of practice. "A gift," he said in halting English, presenting the still warm creation to me. "For the beautiful American Signora." Despite my protests, he insisted I accept it, wrapping it carefully in tissue paper. "To remember Venice," he said. Burano, with its brightly colored fishermen's houses lining small canals, was a photographer's dream. Michael, who had developed an interest in photography since his divorce and remarriage, was in his element, capturing the vibrant hues reflected in the water and the intricate patterns of handmade lace for which the island was known. We found a small restaurant for lunch, where the owner treated us like honored guests when he discovered we were mother and son traveling together. "My mother, she is 86, he told us proudly, showing us a photo of a tiny, fierce-looking woman. "Still, she tells me how to run my restaurant," Michael laughed. "Mothers never stop being mothers, do they?" "Nor sons from being sons," I countered, which made both men nod in agreement. As the afternoon waned, we made our way back to Venice proper, both of us growing quiet as we realized our brief time together was drawing to a close. Michael's flight back to Phoenix was scheduled for early the next morning. That evening, we eschewed restaurants in favor of a picnic in my hotel room. Bread, cheese, olives, and wine procured from small shops near the Rialto Bridge. Sitting by the open window, watching occasional boats pass on the canal below, we reminisced about family vacations long past and Michael's childhood misadventures. Remember that time in Maine when I fell off the dock and Dad jumped in to save me? Even though I could swim perfectly well? Michael chuckled. He didn't stop to think, just acted on instinct, I recalled. Then realized you were fine and felt slightly foolish standing waist-deep in cold water in his good shoes. He never let his dignity get in the way of protecting us, Michael said softly. I try to be that kind of father to Tommy and the girls. You are, I assured him, and a better husband to Kelly than you were to Beth. I normally would have been more tactful about his failed first marriage, but the wine and the intimacy of the moment had loosened my usual restraint. Surprisingly, Michael didn't take offense. You're right. I was too young, too selfish with Beth. Kelly got a more grown-up version of me. He refilled our glasses. Which is why I understand a little of what this trip means for you, Mom. You're discovering parts of yourself that got set aside during your marriage and while raising us. His insight startled me. That's exactly it, I agreed. I loved being Roger's wife and your mother. Those were the defining roles of my life, and I don't regret a moment. But now I'm learning who Eleanor is when she's just herself. And who is she? Michael asked, his eyes warm with genuine curiosity. I considered the question. Someone who loves art and history, who enjoys meeting new people from different cultures, who can navigate foreign cities and order meals in languages she barely speaks, someone more adventurous and resilient than she ever knew. I smiled at him. Not bad discoveries at 80, are they? Not bad at all, he agreed, raising his glass in a toast. To Eleanor Thompson, woman of the world. We clinked glasses, and in that moment, I felt a shift in our relationship, not a diminishment of my role as his mother, but an expansion to include my identity as a person in my own right. The next morning came too quickly. I accompanied Michael to the airport in another water taxi, both of us subdued in the early morning light. At the departure terminal, he hugged me fiercely. Thank you for letting me share a small part of your adventure, he said. It means more than you know. Thank you for seeing me, I replied. Really seeing me. He promised to share everything with James and Patricia, and to help them understand what the journey meant to me. As I watched him disappear into the security area, I felt a curious mixture of sadness at his departure and anticipation for my final destination. Rome, the eternal city, awaited. Back in Venice, I spent one more day exploring areas I hadn't yet visited. The Jewish ghetto with its poignant history, the Peggy Guggenheim collection housed in an unfinished palazzo on the Grand Canal, and the peaceful gardens of the island of San Giorgio Maggiore, accessible by a short Vaporetto ride. That evening, as I packed for tomorrow's train journey to Rome, I realized how much this trip had changed me. Eleanor, who had left Connecticut after a forgotten birthday, was not the same woman who now carefully wrapped the blue glass bird from Murano and tucked it between layers of clothing. That Eleanor had been hurt, searching for something she couldn't quite name. This Eleanor had found it, not just in the beautiful cities she had visited, but within herself. The train ride from Venice to Rome took just over 3.5 hours. Speeding through the Italian countryside past hillside villages, vineyards, and olive groves, I had booked a window seat, eager to watch the landscape transform from the flat Veneto region to the rolling hills of Tuscany, and finally to the countryside surrounding Rome. As the train approached Roma Termini station, I felt a flutter of anticipation. Rome was the culmination of my journey, the final city on my grand tour, and in many ways, the one that had featured most prominently in my imagination since childhood. Ancient ruins, Renaissance art, Baroque fountains. Rome contained layers of history and beauty unlike anywhere else. The station was vast and crowded, a jarring contrast to the serenity of Venice. I navigated my way through the throngs of travelers to find the taxi stand, where I joined the queue for an official white taxi. My hotel was located near the Spanish Steps, in the heart of the historic center, but away from the worst of the tourist congestion. The taxi ride provided my first glimpse of Rome, chaotic, vibrant, and stunningly beautiful even from the window of a speeding car. We passed ancient monuments juxtaposed with bustling modern life, the Colosseum rising majestically while scooters zipped around its perimeter, Renaissance palaces now housing designer boutiques, centuries-old fountains where locals and tourists alike gathered in the afternoon sun. My hotel, once a nobleman's residence, retained elements of its aristocratic past: marble floors, frescoed ceilings, and a rooftop terrace with panoramic views of the city. The staff greeted me warmly in excellent English, offering a welcome glass of Prosecco while completing the check-in formalities. "Your first time in Rome, Signora Thompson?" asked the concierge, a distinguished man with silver hair and an impeccable suit. When I confirmed it was, he spread a map on the counter and marked several locations. The usual sites, of course, the Colosseum, Vatican, Trevi Fountain, but also some less crowded places where you can experience the true Rome. He circled a few areas. Here, the Aventine Hill for sunset. Here, Trastevere for dinner away from tourists. And here, my favorite small church with Caravaggio paintings that most visitors miss. I thanked him for his recommendations, already planning how to structure my final days in Europe. Rome would be my longest stay, a full week before my flight back to the United States. I had deliberately saved it for last, suspecting that the Eternal City would provide a fitting conclusion to my unexpected journey. After settling into my room, elegantly appointed with antiques and modern amenities in perfect balance, I decided to begin my exploration immediately, despite the late afternoon hour. The Spanish Steps were just a short walk from my hotel, and the concierge assured me the evening light would show them at their best. He was right. The famous staircase, sweeping upward from Piazza di Spagna to the Church of Trinità dei Monti, glowed golden in the late afternoon sun. Tourists and locals alike sat on the steps, some taking photos, others simply enjoying the atmosphere. At the base of the stairs, the Barcaccia fountain burbled softly, its boat-shaped basin a whimsical contrast to the elegant symmetry of the steps themselves. I found a place to sit midway up the staircase, content to observe the scene below. A street musician played violin nearby, the familiar strains of Vivaldi's Four Seasons floating on the air. Young couples took selfies. A group of nuns in traditional habits made their way purposefully up the steps, and vendors discreetly offered roses to romantic-looking pairs. As dusk began to fall, lights illuminated the steps and the surrounding buildings. I decided to follow the flow of people toward the Trevi Fountain, just a short distance away. The narrow streets leading there were alive with activity, shops still open, restaurants setting up for dinner service, locals walking home from work. The fountain itself exceeded my expectations. Massive and theatrical, it dominated the small square where it was situated. Neptune's chariot, led by seahorses and surrounded by tritons, seemed to emerge from the palazzo behind it, water cascading dramatically over artificial rocks. Dozens of people crowded around its perimeter, many tossing coins over their shoulders into the churning water. "You must throw a coin," said a voice beside me. I turned to find an elderly Italian woman smiling at me. "1 coin means you will return to Rome. 2 coins you will fall in love with an Italian. 3 coins, marriage." I laughed. At my age, perhaps 1 coin is enough. I found €1 in my purse, turned my back to the fountain and tossed it over, my shoulder as tradition dictated. The small splash was lost among dozens of others, but I felt a childlike satisfaction in participating in the ritual. "Bene," the woman nodded approvingly. "Now, Rome will call you back someday." Whether it was true or not, the sentiment warmed me. As I made my way back to my hotel in the gathering darkness, Rome already felt less like a foreign city and more like a place where I belonged, if only temporarily. Rome unfolded before me like a multi-layered story, each day revealing new chapters of its 3,000-year history. I approached the city methodically, dividing my week into manageable sections: ancient Rome, Vatican City, Renaissance and Baroque sites, and finally, days for wandering without agenda through neighborhoods less frequented by tourists. My first full day was dedicated to ancient Rome. I joined a small group tour led by an archaeologist named Claudia, whose passion for Roman history transformed crumbling ruins into vivid scenes of daily life in the empire. At the Colosseum, she helped us visualize the spectacles that once took place within its massive walls, describing not just the famous gladiatorial contests, but the elaborate staging, the social hierarchies reflected in the seating, and the engineering, marvels that made it all possible. "Close your eyes," she suggested as we stood in the center of the arena. "Listen for the echoes of 50,000 voices that once filled this space." In that moment of silence, surrounded by visitors from around the world, I felt a connection to the countless humans who had stood in this spot over the centuries, from Roman citizens to medieval pilgrims, to grand tour travelers, to modern tourists, like myself. We were all part of an unbroken chain of witness, each of us carrying away our own understanding of this eternal place. The Roman Forum, a sprawling complex of temples, government buildings, and public spaces, initially appeared as little more than a confusing collection of broken columns and partial walls. But under Claudia's guidance, it came alive. The beating heart of an empire that had stretched from Scotland to the Sahara, from Portugal to Persia. "Here, where we stand now," she said as we gathered in what had once been the Senate House, "the fate of much of the known world was decided. Democracy, imperfect as it was, functioned here for hundreds of years before giving way to imperial rule. I thought about my own country's democratic institutions, how fragile they sometimes seemed despite their solid facades. Like Rome, no civilization was permanent, no system inviolable. The ruins around us stood as both monuments and warnings." The following day, I crossed the Tiber River to Vatican City. The line for St. Peter's Basilica stretched across the vast square, but moved efficiently. Inside, the sheer scale of the building was breathtaking. The soaring dome, the ornate chapels, the polished marble floors that had been walked by pilgrims for centuries. Michelangelo's Pietà, protected behind bulletproof glass since a vandalism attempt in the 1970s, drew the largest crowd. But I found myself equally moved by less famous works throughout the basilica. The Vatican museums and Sistine Chapel required a separate visit, one that tested my stamina with miles of corridors displaying one of the world's greatest art collections. I paced myself, taking frequent breaks on the conveniently placed benches, focusing on quality of experience rather than quantity of artifacts seen. When I finally entered the Sistine Chapel, I found a seat along the wall and simply gazed upward at Michelangelo's masterpiece. The famous ceiling, with its scenes from Genesis and its powerful depiction of God creating Adam, was even more extraordinary in person than in the art books I had taught from during my teaching career. The vibrant colors, restored in a controversial cleaning project in the 1980s and 90s, seemed to pulse with life. A guard periodically called for silence and reminded visitors that photos were forbidden, creating brief moments of quiet contemplation before the buzz of whispered conversations resumed. I sat for nearly an hour, absorbing details I had never noticed in reproductions, watching the play of light as clouds passed over the skylights, and reflecting on the combination of faith, patronage, and artistic genius that had created this transcendent space. On my third day in Rome, I focused on Renaissance and Baroque treasures scattered throughout the city center. I visited the Borghese Gallery, with its unparalleled collection of Bernini sculptures and Caravaggio paintings, marveling at how marble could be made to look as soft as flesh, and how light and shadow could create such powerful drama on canvas. Later, I wandered from piazza to piazza, each with its own character and history. Piazza Navona, built on the site of an ancient stadium, featured 3 magnificent fountains, including Bernini's Fountain of the Four Rivers, Campo dei Fiori, a market square by day, transformed into a lively dining and drinking destination by night. The Pantheon, with its perfect dome and oculus open to the sky, stood as a bridge between pagan Rome and the Christian city it became. In each square, I found a cafe where I could rest my feet, sip an espresso or a glass of wine, and observe the flow of life around me. Romans hurried past on their daily business. Tourists consulted maps and guidebooks. Children chased pigeons, and street performers entertained small crowds. I felt simultaneously apart from and part of this eternal pageant. By my fourth day, I had ticked off most of the major sites and was ready to discover Rome at a more leisurely pace. Following the concierge's recommendations, I spent a morning exploring Trastevere, a neighborhood across the Tiber where narrow cobblestone streets, ivy-covered buildings, and small piazzas created a more intimate atmosphere than the grandeur of central Rome. I discovered a tiny church, Santa Maria in Trastevere, its simple exterior belying the glittering Byzantine mosaics within. An old woman knelt in prayer before a side altar, her black-clad figure silhouetted against the golden light filtering through ancient windows. I sat quietly in a back pew, not to pray, but to absorb the centuries of devotion that had seeped into the very stones of the building. Later, I climbed the Aventine Hill, one of Rome's 7 original hills, now an elegant residential area dotted with religious buildings and gardens. At the Piazza dei Cavalieri di Malta, I joined a small line of people waiting to peer through a keyhole in a large green door. When my turn came, I was rewarded with a perfectly framed view of St. Peter's Dome in the distance, a delightful architectural trick that had become a minor tourist attraction. Nearby, the orange garden, Giardino degli Aranci, offered panoramic views of the city below. I found a bench beneath one of the citrus trees and watched the sun begin its descent, turning Rome's terracotta rooftops to gold and picking out the domes and spires of countless churches. A young couple nearby was having a picnic, sharing wine from a bottle and feeding each other bits of cheese and bread. Their happiness reminded me of Roger and me in our early years, when the simplest pleasures had seemed magical when shared. For once, the memory brought more joy than melancholy. Throughout this journey, I had been carrying Roger with me, imagining his reactions to each new sight, each new experience. But somehow, in this garden high above Rome, I felt his presence in a different way. Not as an absence I was trying to fill, but as a completed chapter in my life, precious and preserved, yet not preventing new chapters from being written. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at a restaurant far from the tourist areas, where the menu was only in Italian and the waiter seemed surprised to see an elderly American woman dining alone. He quickly warmed to me, however, when I attempted to order, in my rudimentary Italian, then graciously switched to English to explain the specials. "You are traveling by yourself?" he asked as he served my pasta. When I confirmed this, adding that Rome was the final stop on my European tour, he called over the owner, a stout woman with henned hair who insisted on bringing me a complimentary glass of homemade limoncello with my dessert. "To celebrate your courage," she explained. "My mother, she never left our village until the day they carried her to the cemetery. You are doing what she could not imagine." I raised a small glass of toast to your mother and to new possibilities at any age. The days passed too quickly. I visited more churches, museums, and ancient sites than I could possibly remember distinctly, yet each contributed to my growing sense of Rome as a palimpsest, a document written over many times, with earlier texts still visible beneath the eye. Newer ones. On my last full day in the city, I returned to the Trevi Fountain early in the morning, before the crowds arrived. The square was quiet, just a few locals passing through on their way to work and a couple of photographers capturing the monument in the soft morning light. I found a spot at the edge of the fountain basin and took out the final coin I had saved for this moment. As I prepared to toss it over my shoulder, I remembered the Italian woman's explanation. One coin means you will return to Rome. The prospect seemed unlikely at my age. This grand European tour had been a once-in-a-lifetime adventure, not the beginning of a series of such journeys. Yet as I held the coin, I realized that what mattered wasn't whether I would physically return to Rome, but that Rome, and Paris, London, Amsterdam, Berlin, Vienna, and Venice would remain with me forever, part of who I had become during these transformative weeks. I tossed the coin backward, hearing the small splash as it joined thousands of others in the fountain's basin. Perhaps I would return someday. Perhaps not. Either way, I had this moment, this city, this life that had expanded beyond what I could have imagined when I sat alone on my 80th birthday. My flight back to the United States was scheduled for early the next morning. I had packed carefully the night before, making sure the small treasures I had collected, the blue glass bird from Murano, Henrik's book of Dutch poetry, Madame Beaumont's silk scarf, and other mementos, were securely wrapped and distributed throughout my luggage to prevent breakage. The hotel arranged for a car to take me to Fiumicino Airport, where I navigated check-in and security with the confidence of a now experienced traveler. The terminal was crowded with a mix of vacationers returning home and business travelers setting off for new destinations. As I waited at my gate, I called Gladys to confirm my arrival time in Connecticut. After weeks of texting updates, it was good to hear her voice. "You sound different," she observed. "More, I don't know, zesty." I laughed at her choice of words. "Zesty at 80? I'll take that as a compliment." "Your children have been calling me almost daily for updates," she continued. "I think they're planning some kind of welcome home thing. Just a warning in case you're exhausted from the flight." "I appreciate the heads up," I said, though in truth I was touched by their thoughtfulness. "How much did you tell them about how this all started?" "Just that you needed time for yourself after they forgot your birthday." I left out the part where we schemed together to create your escape plan. I smiled, remembering our plotting over tea in my kitchen, which now seemed a lifetime ago. "Well, you were a magnificent accomplice. I couldn't have done it without you." "Sure you could have," Gladys countered. "You're the bravest person I know, Eleanor Thompson. Now get on that plane and come home so I can hear all about your adventures, in person, and get my scandalous souvenir from Paris." The flight from Rome to New York was long but uneventful. I dozed, read, watched a movie, and reflected on all that had happened since I had impulsively decided to cash those saved checks and see the world. The person who had left Connecticut was not the same one returning. I had discovered capacities within myself I had never suspected, for adaptation, for connection, for joy, independent of my familiar roles and relationships. JFK Airport was a chaotic re-entry into American life, loud, sprawling, and efficient in its own aggressive way after the more measured pace of European cities. I made my way through customs and immigration, claimed my luggage, and found the gate for my connecting flight to Hartford, where James would be waiting to drive me home. The short regional flight gave me time to prepare myself for the transition, back to my regular life. What would change? What would stay the same? How would I integrate the Eleanor who had wandered alone through 6 European countries with the Eleanor who was mother, grandmother, neighbor, and friend in Riverside, Connecticut? As the plane began its descent, I caught sight of the familiar Connecticut landscape below, the winding coastline, the autumn-painted forests, the neat towns with their white church spires. Home. Despite all I had seen and experienced, the view still pulled at my heart. James was waiting just past security, his face breaking into a relieved smile when he spotted me. Unlike Michael's bear hug in Venice, James's embrace was careful, as if he feared I might have become fragile during my absence. "Welcome home, Mom," he said, taking my suitcase. "You look incredible, actually." Was half expecting you to come back exhausted, but you're positively glowing. European air agrees with me, I replied lightly. How are Susan and the kids? They're great. Emma's applying to colleges, if you can believe it. Mark's fully into his moody teenager phase. He guided me toward the parking garage. Everyone's excited to see you. We've, arranged a little welcome home gathering. Nothing too much, he added hastily. Just family. If you're too tired, we can cancel. I'd love to see everyone, I assured him. I've missed you all, despite what you might think. The drive from the airport to my house took about 30 minutes, during which James filled me in on family news while carefully avoiding any criticism of my solo adventure. I sensed he had been coached, probably by Michael, to respect my choices even if he still found them bewildering. As we turned onto my street, I saw several cars parked in front of my house, Patricia's sensible sedan, Michael's rental, and Susan's minivan. James looked slightly embarrassed. So much for just family being a surprise? I laughed. At my age, predictable surprises are the best kind. They were all waiting on the porch. Patricia, Michael, Kelly, Susan, and all 5 grandchildren, ranging from Tommy, Michael's 6-year-old, to Emma, James's 17-year-old. A large welcome home, Grandma, banners hung from the eaves, obviously, the work of the younger children. As I emerged from the car, they erupted in cheers and applause, as if I were returning from some heroic quest rather than an extended vacation. Perhaps in a way I was. The next few hours passed in a blur of hugs, questions, gifts, and the chaos that always accompanied family gatherings. The dining room table was laden with food, a potluck of everyone's specialties, including Patricia's famous lasagna and Susan's apple pie. Between serving plates and answering questions about my travels, I observed my family with fresh eyes. Patricia, always the organized one, had clearly orchestrated the welcome home party, right down to the color-coordinated napkins and plates. James hovered protectively, refilling my water glass and ensuring I had a comfortable seat. Michael, having already shared part of my journey, acted as translator of sorts, helping the others understand what the trip had meant to me. The grandchildren were fascinated by the small gifts I had brought them. Venetian carnival masks for the girls, miniature Roman soldier figures for the boys, and various European chocolates for all. Emma, on the cusp of adulthood, seemed particularly interested in my solo travel. "Weren't you scared, Grandma?" she asked as she helped me unpack. "Going to all those places alone?" Not scared, I reflected. Nervous sometimes, uncertain, but also exhilarated. There's a difference between fear and the natural anxiety that comes with doing something new. She nodded thoughtfully. I get that. It's like when I did my first debate competition. Terrified beforehand, but then kind of addicted to the feeling afterward. Exactly. And at any age, that feeling of stretching beyond what's comfortable, it reminds you that you're alive. As evening approached, Michael proposed a toast. To Mom, he said, raising his glass, who taught us it's never too late for a new adventure, who forgave us for a major screw-up. Here he glanced meaningfully at his siblings and turned disappointment into the journey of a lifetime. We're so glad you're home safe, but even more glad that you had the courage to go. James and Patricia echoed the sentiment, adding their own apologies for forgetting my birthday and their admiration for what I had done in response. I almost wish we'd forget your birthday every year, James joked, if this is the result. Don't you dare, I warned, but with a smile. As the gathering wound down and family members began to depart, Patricia to catch a late train back to Boston, James and Susan to get the kids home for school tomorrow, I found myself standing on the porch with Michael, watching the autumn sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. So, he asked quietly, was it everything you hoped for? I considered the question, thinking of all I had seen and experienced. The museums and cathedrals, the meals shared with strangers who became friends, the moments of solitude in beautiful places, the rediscovery of my own capabilities. It was more, I said simply, more than I could have imagined. And now, back to regular life? I smiled, thinking of the Trevi Fountain and my coin toss, of the friends I had made in 6 countries, of the woman I had become during these transformative weeks. Regular life, yes, I agreed. But not the same life. Not exactly. Later, after everyone had gone and I was alone in my house for the first time in 6 weeks, I unpacked my treasures and found places for them among my familiar possessions. The blue glass bird from Murano went on the windowsill where morning light would catch. Its sapphire wings. Madame Beaumont's scarf draped elegantly over a lampshade, casting a blue-green glow in the corner of my living room. I picked up Roger's pocket watch from where I had placed it on the mantel and opened it, looking at the face that had marked time for him for so many years. We did it, I told him softly. We saw all those places we dreamed about, not the way we planned, but maybe the way it needed to be. Setting the watch back in its place, I moved to the kitchen to make a cup of tea, a habit that had remained constant despite all that had changed. As the kettle boiled, I leaned against the counter and looked around the familiar space, seeing it with new eyes. This house, this town, this life, they were still mine, still precious to me. But they were no longer all that defined me. Eleanor Thompson was also the woman who had sipped coffee in a Parisian cafe, climbed the Spanish Steps, cruised Amsterdam's canals, stood where history was made in Berlin, attended a concert in Vienna's Golden Hall, and tossed a coin in the Trevi Fountain, and who knew what else she might yet become. I poured hot water over the tea bag and smiled to myself. My children had forgotten my 80th birthday, and in doing so had given me the most unexpected gift, the chance to remember who I was beyond the roles that had defined me for so long. For that, oddly enough, I was grateful. The forgotten birthday had become unforgettable after all. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.